Hey everybody, this is Keylime again. This time I thought I would create a video to try and help the world combat this plague that has taken over this game, which is what I'm referring to as Satan's team here. So Satan's team, of course, is this one, if you've probably run into it. So it deals with this life and death weapon, and it's always being run with an Orbweaver class. Just in my defense, I do not have Orbweaver leveled at all, so rest assured I am not a cultist of the Satan's team here, but ultimately what is making this team super frustrating is this notion of this life and death weapon in conjunction with this Orbweaver class. So let's look at what life and death does real quick to understand why this is such a pain in the ass. So it's stealing 26 life, at least in my instance, from two enemies. So the person themselves is gaining life at a pretty considerable rate. This is like roughly 50 health every single time they cast it, which is pretty strong. It's also death marking two people, which is also annoying. But then on top of that, this blessed part is the part that really makes this like the end of the world type nonsense. So when a troop is blessed, it's immune from essentially all status effects, as it's saying up here. So you can't mana burn them, you can't mana drain them, you can't stun them, you can't do anything to them. So that makes them extremely annoying to try and deal with. However, what makes it even more frustrating is that Orbweaver, if we look at what they do, there's a couple of things, but I'll start with this. So they're also stealthy. So as long as their Orbweaver is up to level 40 and they have this stealthy, they can start doing annoying things as well. So you can imagine if a troop is both stealth and blessed, they're pretty much untouchable. You can't get to that troop via any kind of targeted method. You have to be doing something else to try and get to them, like AoE damage or just random target type spells. It's really, really cumbersome to try and get at this person. So how do you deal with this? Like, I'm sure if you've actually fought this team, you've experienced this insanely frustrating fight where they're constantly summoning stuff all over the place. They're constantly pumping up this troop. You can't really ever hit them down. You know, every single one of these troops is summoning oriented, minus Graves here, but this guy is just constantly summoning spiders to fill up the board, so if you're doing random damage, it's hard to even hit this guy. This person's summoning if they ever kill you. They're also webbing you constantly. This guy's also webbing you constantly, the Orbweaver is. And then we have this King Avaloran guy who's also summoning stuff on top of that, plus he's just doing damage to everybody. Plus all elves start with 50% mana, which life and death as an Orbweaver would be. So all of this is stupid, right? I hate this. Like, this is like the stuff that I hate when it comes to this game. This is like the lineup that I would imagine a 10-year-old kid would make in Counter-Strike to troll people or some crap like that. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's one of those lineups that's no fun. It's not fun for anybody. And because you don't have to actually play with this team, it's just fun to know that the team that's fighting up against it just hates their life, right? So pure troll lineup. So how do we combat this kind of a thing? P.S. This would be extremely effective in Guild Wars. In Guild Wars, I understand that it's no mercy, so I'll forgive you if you use this in Guild Wars. But outside of that, I just don't like you if you use this. So, sorry, but I just don't. So how do we combat this team, right? We mentioned that the person's blessed. We mentioned that they're stealthy, and they start with 50% mana, and they have a troop in their lineup that can potentially just take over the board right away and start casting. So what can we do? So, well, we have a couple options. So we have a few options, actually. So there's a bunch of classes that have this specific Guardian tree. What's nice about this Guardian tree is that up 70, it gets this banishment. So at banishment, if I can sneak my mouse, I'm not going to be able to, I'll leave here. It'll dispel all enemies on 4 or 5 gem matches. So that means if they're blessed, it goes away. If they're enchanted, it goes away. So any kind of buffs they've put on themselves all get destroyed right away when you have a 4 or 5 match of any kind, as long as you're running a hero class that has this banishment in it. So the actual classes that have banishment in them, that would be Death Knights get it, Dragon Guards get it, Knights actually get it, Mechanists get it, Rune Priest gets it, Sentinel gets it, and Warden gets it. So more than likely the classes that you would find most useful to be PvPing with would be your Rune Priest if you have it, your Sentinel if you've got it, and then Mechanist if you have it, and Dragon Guard. I'd say those are probably the most obvious useful ones that you could be using that have that banishment. So if you can build a lineup around any of those classes, you're going to give yourself a much better chance of getting a win, just purely because you can banish off the bless that they put on themselves. So now you're just dealing with someone who's stealthy. Okay, so now we've got a stealthy troop but how the heck do we actually get at them? So there's a few ways, but the most effective way to do this would actually be stun. So what stun does is it turns off all of the traits associated with somebody. So if somebody's stealthy and they're stunned, they're no longer stealthy. And in the case of that Orbweaver team that we were talking about, he's also summoning a bunch of spiders. It turns off his spiders. So he's not summoning people anymore. He's not stealthy anymore. He's just some dude on the board. So at that point in time, it's just do whatever the heck you want to the guy, and it's game on. So when it comes to stun people, there's a handful of people that we can potentially look at, but there's really only a couple that are actually useful. So the reason Champion of Anu wouldn't be, for instance, is that his stun that he can do and his silence that he can do is only dealing damage to the person and then everyone below them. So we need to stun them first some other way before we can actually put Justice Blade on them. So that's not useful. Even if we dispel the bless that they have on them, they're still stealthy, so I can't target them with this, so this isn't actually useful at all. I would have to stun them some other way and then do something like this to just prevent them from ever casting. So that's not that great. However, Corvash is kind of like the perfect anti-life and death troop here, so he's stunning the first two people and draining the mana of the first two people. So you're kind of in a race with the other team. As long as you can get your Corvash cast off first before they do, he's going to be mana drained and he's going to be stunned, and then you just gotta kill him some other way. So Corvash is actually an MVP. He's also stunning on a random 4/5, so even if you just happen to be matching gems on the board just by playing casually on your first couple turns, but you're not quite getting Corvash full, you still could end up stunning him anyway. And then once he's stunned, that's your opportunity. That's your window of opportunity to actually do something. So Corvash is actually somebody who's extremely great. But the biggest MVP with all of this stuff is Obsidious. So Obsidious, when you do any 4/5 match, he's stunning all enemies on the board. So all you would really need to be doing is running one of those classes that I talked about before with an Obsidious in your lineup. And you're dispelling him if he ever gets blessed, and then you're stunning him every time you do a 4 and 5. So every single 4/5 you do is going to perfectly counter that life and death hero. So the nice thing is that Obsidious is actually a really good troop in general, and some of those classes that I mentioned before are just good in general. So you can build lineups around those classes, those troops, and any of those that you put together will actually be extremely effective counters to Obsidious, or I'm sorry, to life and death. So I've put together a handful of these. So this team doesn't look like it's an obvious counter to life and death. It doesn't use anything that I just talked about except for the Dragon Guard class, so this is there for the dispels. However, what's nice about this is that it's taking away all the browns on the board. It's giving you an opportunity to get mana right away. Life and death is looking to use browns, so it's effective in that capacity. The other thing that's good about it, however, is that it has Worldbreaker in here, which is just doing a decent amount of AoE damage to everybody and is just looping constantly. So with Worldbreaker, if you're doing AoE damage to the entire other team, something that can happen there is that you basically never get a summon to deal with. He's never actually summoning anything because the board is actually constantly full of the original lineup they had. He's not killing anybody. So you're just kind of like whittling him down, whittling him down, whittling him down. As long as you can be running this, like if a Firestorm running, which a Dragon Guard would run a Firestorm at the start of the turn, if you can get Worldbreaker running pretty early, you're going to just like whittle them, whittle them, whittle them, and then they're dead. So this is actually a very effective way of getting through a life and death team. You just do AoE damage with constant looping going on, and you'll just eventually just plick him down. Like after maybe 3 to 4 casts, he'll just be gone. The reason that this goes nicely with Dragon Guard is that you're getting magic pumped every single time you do this, so he might be magic pumping himself with his natural trait here. But beyond all of that, you're at least getting 1 magic by running Dragon Guard every single time you do a 4/5 as well. So this team doesn't run any stuns, but since we're just doing AoE damage constantly with Worldbreaker, we're just hitting him constantly anyway. So that's a really effective way of kind of getting through that life and death kind of team as well. So this is very good. Again, Taipan just instantly removing all browns for the board and then giving you a chance to just start casting right away is a very effective way of getting board control early and then just taking over the fight from there. This team, however, is using Corvash, as I mentioned before. It's running a Dervish because Corvash is a monster as well as Glaceon is a monster. So we've got 2 monsters here, and the other thing that's nice is that Jar of Eyes is forcing an Ice Storm every single time you cast it. So if you cast a Jar of Eyes, a bunch of blue is going to be coming down from the top of the board, and if you recall, apologize for all the scrolling, no one really cares about blue on this team, so if the entire board is full of a bunch of blues, like Graveseer doesn't convert to blues in any capacity, or he doesn't use blues in his conversion, King Avalorn, him casting is really not that scary. It's a one-shot thing, it doesn't loop, the damage isn't like that exciting, you know, it's just really summoning somebody else. The only reason this dude's in this lineup is really to give Life and Death that 50% mana start. So putting a bunch of blue on the board is actually very annoying for this team to deal with because no one really cares if King Avalorn gets mana. Like, that's not what he's trying to get full. So when you use something like this, Glaceon can punch through with insanely strong damage. It can use the blue that's all on the board and then convert more blue. So he's turning all yellows to blues. So any yellows that are on the board are getting turned to blues. You're making blues constantly here. Possessed King is making everything bounce all over the place. You're stunning people constantly with all the 4 or 5 matches. And then as long as you do something early, you're going to be able to punch through with Corvash. The only thing that's not so great about this lineup is that since it's a Dervish, you're not going to be able to get that Dispel that I was talking about. However, you can run this completely fine with the Sentinel class. So there's no reason why you couldn't run the same lineup with Sentinel class. So if that Dispel is something that you really, really want to have in there, this would be the most effective counter for Life and Death specifically if you run this with Sentinel. The reason I run it specifically with Dervish is that Dervish is the better class to use for this lineup for every other fight except for the Life and Death. So if you want to just be fighting and you never want to have to worry about switching around classes or anything like that, run it with Sentinel. It'll have the Dispel, it has the stuns, it has massive damage potential. It even has Transform in there, so like as a worst case scenario you can Dispel with a 4 or 5 match with your Sentinel and then potentially just transform it away. But this team has a ton of things you can do against a Life and Death, and honestly this team can farm anything that you want anyway. So running this with the Sentinel is probably the easiest and best way to get it done. I would probably argue if you are going to do this, just turn off, just make sure that you're doing this versus the brown mana. Always make sure that you have the banishment turned on in that instance. So something to keep in mind. So that team is extremely effective. And then the last one that I put together here is kind of a weird one, but it totally works for weird reasons. So again, we're running a Sentinel. It's very brown mana heavy. So we have Gimlet to try and get things started. But then we also have Obsidius here who's going to be stunning everybody, so that's really nice. So we've got Dispels going on with the class, we've got the stuns going on with Obsidius. But what this is also kind of doing, which is sneaky, is that it's knocking the first enemy to the back, which means now Life and Death is the first troop in the game. And then it has a chance to just devour them straight up. So if they're blessed, this isn't going to work. But since we're running Sentinel with the Dispel, we could potentially get through that. As long as they're not blessed and we can dispel them constantly, we can punch right through that. So that is actually very, very nice. So once the Life and Death troop is up in the first slot, the Life and Death is really not as scary when it's in the first slot, and that's really for a couple of reasons. So when the hero troop is in the first slot, so let's just look at that team again directly. When this dude's in the first slot, the problem is that he's no longer summoning anything above him. So skull damage is now directly hitting the hero. And when the hero is in the top slot, one thing you may not know about Bless is that Bless falls off if you use a spell or you do skull damage. So normally this guy is just casting over and over again, so he's just constantly blessed. But once he's in that first slot, the AI isn't smart enough to know I shouldn't be matching skulls because I'm going to lose my bless. So they'll just take a skull, and then there you have a dude who's just not blessed anymore. So now he's just wide open to start hitting with other stuff. So that's a really cool thing about that other team that I just showed you. It's an extremely effective way to just shift that guy around and then just like do your fun stuff. Like cast Bullet once, you might just eat him straight up, which would be cool because this team is creating a bunch of brown mana. But you can stun him right away, you can dispel him constantly, you potentially just eat him. But the nice thing about this lineup is that once that Life and Death is just moved up to that top slot, you're really not worried about winning anymore. The annoying thing about Life and Death is kind of gone at that point. So Bullet is actually kind of doing a lot of really interesting, fun stuff. So again, I hope that kind of gives you some perspective on what you want to do when you're fighting up against a Life and Death lineup. any of these teams would be moderately effective. Like, this team is actually very effective at winning PvP anyway, so you could just be running this constantly. It's actually what I'm using to level up Dragon Guard right now. But you could just be running this constantly, and you can feel good knowing that if you go up against life and death, you're not going to have too much trouble. Same thing with this team. You could run this team completely and farm PvP with this, and if you go up against a life and death, it's just not going to be any complication whatsoever. You've got the dispels, you've got the stuns, you have massive damage potential. So again, like, you could just be farming PvP with a team like this, and you never need to worry about life and death showing up. This team is kind of more specifically made to counter life and death directly, so I wouldn't really recommend using this team to just PvP in general. You could, honestly, like, Obsidius is looping a good amount, Mountain Crusher is looping a good amount, Bullet might just eat a bunch of people, so I mean, it's not that it's the worst team on the planet, but honestly, it's most effective against life and death. Like, this team was put together specifically to counter life and death. So that kind of gives you some perspective on what you can do to try and counter this, like, gross meta that's developed around this annoying Satan's team here. So again, Dispel to get rid of the Bless, and then Stuns to get rid of the Stealth, and then do anything and everything you can to get rid of this. Transform it, just blow it up, rope dart it up to the top, like, anything you can do to just get rid of this guy. Once you get rid of this guy, this team is not really all that dangerous or exciting. So here we have a life and death team, but you can notice that this is kind of not being put together correctly. So they're running it with a Titan, which is not the right class to be doing this with. I can see the theme of what they're trying to do. So Rock Troll's creating a bunch of brown, which fills up life and death. Life and death being a Titan will already have 50% mana start. They might just randomly kill me with Megavore. They're going to get a lot of barriers from this. So this team could be annoying. Anytime life and death is there, it'll always at least be annoying. But it's not really built the right way. So let's see how we do against this life and death team. So right off the bat, we are very fortunate. We do have a 4-match here of browns, which is always helpful. Since we are running this Jar of Eyes, we do prefer to fill that first so we can get this board looking blue sooner. However, we'll always happily take a 4-match here. We're lucky enough to get another. Just quickly glancing downward, no. Here we're going to get these greens. We'll do this. And we already have Glaceon mostly full, however, I'd still rather get my jar, so I think I'm going to go here. And now we're in a good spot. So they're already full, however, we are controlling the board. At this point in time, I see that Glaceon has a 4-match, so we'll be doing this. And now Life and Death is not a happy guy. Like, when he casts and he's blessed, he's probably going to be feeling pretty good about himself, but we have Corvash here, who is here to just ruin all of his fun. So that's what's cool about Corvash being in your lineup. And now we've got Glaceon 5-match. And suddenly there was a life and death there, and he is no more. So at this point we're just running cleanup. 4-match, why not? So that was cool. And then we just have one dude left. Let's turn him into something. Oh well. I wanted to, but we did not. Just trying to go for the epic finisher here, just to ultimately embarrass him. Fortunately, I was not able to. Sorry, I was trying to do it for you guys. But no Glaceon matches. There's a skull. Let's do it. Bap. And we win. So that's an example of a really bad life and death team. We were perfectly set up to counter the good one. However, against a bad one, it's just not even worth it. So Jessica, if you're watching this video, please update that team. That team's got some issues. You do want to be running that with an Orbweaver instead. However, I'm sure you do sneak out a lot of interesting wins with just that. And I do like your little Sphinx there with your headdress thing. That's actually a pretty cool combo. But yeah, that's a life and death team. Let's look at another. So here's an alternate variation of the life and death team that I've seen. So it's actually a couple of lusts with a life and death and a Graveseer. So it's the same general being a piece of shit kind of lineup, but what it's actually doing here is doing a lot of self-damage on top of all this. This potentially has the benefit of being worse, but we'll see. I'm going to use my actual anti-LD lineup just to demo that. But yeah, that's also kind of a dumb lineup. Pretty much any lineup that's got life and death in it is just, you know, the bane of existence. So of course what we're trying to do here is get our brown mana flowing. We do fortunately have some Gimlet goodness going on up top, so let's do that. The other benefit of course is that I stole all the greens that they wanted to convert, so that's pretty cool as well. I am actually just going to see, there's not 13 yet, so let's not use bullet. Still no, but let's just get that life and death up into the first slot. So now we're in a really good spot because he's stunned up there, he has no kind of enchant going on, but fortunately for us, now that he's in that top slot, we can kind of just do what we need to do to get him down. So I'm trying to prioritize my Mountain Crusher mana, however we do have Obsidius just about full, so let's just do that. And then we start doing our damage. The other benefit of running this lineup specifically against Lust is that, you know, just by having Obsidius in your lineup, Lust is completely disabled at this point, so that's actually very nice. But then we're just going to keep doing our fun Lusty stuff, or our fun Obsidius stuff. So he's casting now, which normally would be very annoying. As you can see that I lost my mana up top there, which is very dumb, which makes me a sad man. However, we can just keep the party going. He is blessed right now, however, he's going to take those skulls and then he'll lose it, or he could lose that. We can also just do skull damage ourselves at this point, but we're just going to keep doing our little fun Obsidius party up here. I don't want to cast Bullet because I want to keep him up there at the top, so I'm just going to leave him. So again, he does this, but again, we have Gimlet, so we're good. So we'll just keep that party going. I'm just going to keep matching browns, see what shows up. Nothing in particular. We'll just hit him with some skulls. And then I can't make skulls magically touch. We might just kill him with this. Ta-da! So this team is able to dispatch of Life and Death. That was actually an interesting variant of Life and Death. I actually just found someone who was running a Life and Death team and fought them, which is why that's my gold. But of course, what's interesting about that lineup version is that stun became the most important thing in that lineup. But as you can see, once Life and Death was in that first slot, kind of everything it was trying to do was no longer really working. If it was trying to be blessed, it couldn't stay blessed very long. And you're able to hit it directly with skulls. I think I hit it with one skull and it did like, I don't know, 80 something damage there because of Gimlet. Gimlet will enrage that first person, so any skull hits you do are extremely strong from that point of view. So they don't really have any ability to do any of the fun looping that they're trying to do. So that's an example of like also what you can do with that lineup. So, you know, a couple examples of some fights there. For what it's worth, I know there's some cuts in this video and you might be thinking I edited out some fights. I did not. So I've recorded other fights. I didn't like the way I was talking over them. I felt like I was saying some kind of dumb stuff. But rest assured, every single fight that I've done, and I can assure you of this, I did not lose any of them. Some of them didn't look as pretty, but for the most part, they were all fairly easy. These lineups can, again, farm pretty much whatever you want to do, but Life and Death isn't all that scary, as long as you know how to build against them. Here's another example. So this is actually the proper team, so I want to show this. But yeah, let's see how my LD Smash team does against a proper Orbweaver version of the Life and Death team. This is the exact version of the team that is the most annoying to deal with. So hopefully I can show you guys that this is totally fine as well. So something that you always want to be aware of is that Graveseer is going to try and convert greens to purples. So what you need to do immediately is look at the board. If there's 4 or 5 matches for yourself, take them. But if there's not, you need to be looking for what is he going to get when he casts. In this instance, this is the only gem match he's going to get. This is actually a very nice setup from that perspective. So he's going to get a single purple, which will actually get him close or full for life or death. So we're in a pretty scary spot right away. The other bad thing about this is that he's actually going to take all my greens away, so that's not going to be useful or fun for me either. So we're going to see if we can prevent him from actually doing this. If I take this purple and pull these 2 down, he's still not going to get any matches, so that's okay. Of course he magically is able to do that anyway. But now we're going to try and do our thing that we're trying to do. So you can see that he's stunned, thanks to our good old boy Obsidius. So now it's really just a matter of getting him down. So what we're really trying to do here, let's cast this. Oh, that was the most fortunate thing on the planet. Ta-da! Now we win and we take our victory lap. I'm so pumped. Sorry, nothing gets me happier than just killing the life and death teams. You can see it's obviously still like a pretty scary fight regardless. It's the frustrating thing about life and death is that it's not something you can just like decide to beat. It's not that easy, unfortunately. But teams like this are the ones that give you the most benefit. I'm just casting this for the green because I don't give an F. And then just for fun, I'm gonna waste this, and I'm gonna get him again with it because I'm a mean man. Oh, I turned him into a frog. Oh well. And now we super green it, and then we'll just cast Obsidious for kicks. Normally I would care more about where I click, but I was just doing my victory lap. But yeah, that's an example of how you also deal with him. And this team would be completely effective against anybody else. So that's another example of dealing with life and death. And again, that's the exact version of life and death that you need to be able to fight against. So hopefully that helped. That is how you get through life and death teams. I hope that gave you some better ideas on how to counter this team. Maybe some farm teams you could be using so you don't really have to worry if you run into this team. But yeah, figured I'd make this video since I, like many others, just hate this team, and anything I can do to try and help the community just feel a little better about themselves that they can murder this team whenever they want, I'm very happy to be sharing that information. So again, this is Keylime. Hopefully this video is cool, and I will talk to you guys later. Thanks.